Okay, so chapter 5, I want you to read verse 1. And there was a great cry of the people, and I want you to see, of their wives, against their brethren the Jews. And there's a reason that we see that. And you're going to see it in verse 2. The first thing that we find in chapter 5, verse 2, is they said, "We, our sons and our daughters, are many. Therefore we take up corn for them that we may eat and live." It was during this time that there wasn't enough food for the large families because these people had tons and tons of family and probably children. And they said, "We can't feed them. There's not enough food in the city to feed them." So that would be the first reason why they were crying out, why the wives are crying out. Now let's get the second reason. The second reason, again, verse 3, it says, "This time we have mortgaged our lands, our vineyards, our houses, that we might buy corn because of the," it says drought, that would be famine. So what they're saying is, we can't feed our families. And the real reason that they're saying that, if you go ahead and you do the research, is that we have mortgaged our houses over and over again to survive the spiraling inflation. And I ran in to tell Mike this thing, and he said, "So you're telling me this is familiar to what we're dealing with in today's world?" And I said, "Absolutely." The spiraling inflation, it was hitting the families because they were having, and we're going to see this in verses 4 and 5, they were also that said, "We have borrowed money for the king's tribute." What is a tribute? Tax. "And that our lands and our vineyards," this is king, "was taxing the people of Judah." And remember, he was in charge still of the city of Jerusalem. Remember, he sent Nehemiah to come in and do this. But these people were so heavily in debt because they couldn't pay their taxes that they were borrowing money they didn't have to repay back the money that they had borrowed. Sounds so familiar in today's world. That we see people now that they're buying their food for their family on a credit card. And now they're struggling of, how do I pay this back? Now let's look at verse 5. "Yet now our flesh is as the flesh of our brethren, our children as their children. And lo, we bring into bondage our sons and our daughters to be servants." So what does that mean? It means they began to repo their homes, repo their lands, their cattle. They went after all the things that they could that were personal, but then they went after their kids. And they were taking away the sons and the daughters. They were putting the daughters into sexual trades. Does it not sound familiar? And you're seeing this, and it's like, God, there's nothing new under the sun, Ecclesiastes. And what they were doing then, we see the applications of it in today's world. The taxes were too high, the food costs were too high, or they couldn't afford it. And because of that, the family was trying to make do, and so they would go and borrow the money, and then they would come and say, "I want repayment," and they would come and repossess the homes, the cattle, the animals, and then they went after the children. I mean, you're sitting there and you're going, Lord, it's the same thing. But I want you to see Nehemiah's response in verse 6. "And I was very," what? Angry. Nehemiah said, "I was very angry." Why was he angry? Because Nehemiah had no idea that this was going on. He had no clue that his people were being oppressed, that the money lenders were charging high interest rates. Who can tell me what a credit card is now here? Isn't it like 35%, 28%? That's what I've been told. I'm glad you don't know. Okay. But the money lenders were charging high interest rates, and the people were being oppressed. But this is the part I want you to get. It was called a usury tax. Usury is what it was called. But what made Nehemiah so angry is that that was strictly forbidden by Jewish law. So turn over to Exodus 22:25. So Mike, can you look that up for me since you're playing with your phone?
I got caught.
You got caught. Exodus 22:25. And I want you to read that for me.
22:25.
Yeah.
It says, if you lend money to any of my people who are poor among you, you shall not be like the money lender to him. You shall not charge him interest.
Oh my goodness, it was already covered. I tell you what, you see that, and a part of me goes, this is what God has planned for us as well. He doesn't want us to have to pay the taxes. He doesn't want us to pay the interest. And this is what I believe in my heart God's trying to rectify. But I want you to see something with Nehemiah. He was angry. Here's the scriptures to say that this is what he was angry about, was being charged this interest. So let's look at verse 10. He said, I likewise and my brethren and my servants might exact of them money and corn. I pray, let us leave off the usury. So we see in verse 10, Nehemiah saying, stop it. I don't care who he's talking to. He's talking to mostly rulers. He even called the king. Can you imagine telling some president of ours, stop it. Stop doing this. But then he says, after stop it or quit, the second part that you're going to see in verses 11, 12, there was not just a quit. He said, let's correct it. Let's make certain that what you have done wrong, you correct. So how does he correct it? He tells that their money has to be refunded. That's number 3, commit. And you'll see this in verses 12 and 13. He said, we will restore them, and we will require nothing of them. So will we do as thou sayest. He went and he said, stop it. Quit. You're not going to do this anymore. I wish we had some people that would stand up and say that. And then he says, correct it, restore, give back what you've taken. And then it says, commit, make an oath. And the oath was not to Nehemiah, it was to God. And then at the very end, after he had all this talk with the rulers and the king, he does something. It says he shook his lap. Now, I would have thought he had breadcrumbs. But when you research it, you find out that when he shook his lap, it was a sign saying, God will curse you if you break this vow. He was serious. This has got to stop now. And he rebuked the nobles. He went and he did it, and he had no fear in rebuking them. He was saying, this has to stop. You cannot do something that the Word of God says is opposite. He was using the Word of God to be able to build what God had given him to build. And he didn't want the people to be in a place to where they couldn't do what they had been called to do. Now let's look at verses 14. I'm going to have to turn my little Bible. And it says, and I shook my lap, that was verse 13. Moreover, from the time that I was appointed to be governor in the land of Judah. Who was appointed to be the governor? Nehemiah. I'm telling you, people desire to see a godly person in political office. And here he was put in this place. And I love it because when I said it before, I said he shook it from his lap. He was saying, now you've committed a vow to God that you are not going to do this any longer. You're going to quit, you're going to correct, and you're going to commit. He made them do that. And everybody said, man, you're now our new governor. You're going to be able to correct these people. So in verse 14, we see him say that. Then let's look at 15. But the former governors, people like me, Nehemiah said, that have been before me were chargeable unto the people. and had taken of them bread and wine, besides 40 shekels of silver. Yea, even their servants bear rule over the people, but so did not I, because of the fear of God. So we're going to get into breaking that down, but first it said not only did they take and they made them spend for their family, they took their sheep, they took their goats, they took their their handmaidens, they took their all the other stuff that went with it, the vineyards, but they took 40 shekels of silver. Now, I thought of 30 shekels of silver. Who got 30 shekels of silver? Do you remember? Judas. Judas got 30 shekels of silver. That was easy to find. But 40 shekels of silver was around $800 in our daily average. So we're not talking about a small amount of money. When you think of a shekel, I've always thought it was like a penny. But if you do the research, it's closer to $10 to $16. So not only did they lose their vineyards, their family, their clothing, their animals, they also had to pay a tax, which was 40 shekels of silver. They were being just absolutely moved apart. But then, as we see in verse 15, we see that Nehemiah says to the leaders and the governors of Jerusalem, I had rights. You see what he's saying in verse 15? They had rights to take bread and wine of all sorts of things of the people for themselves, and Nehemiah said that was my right as well. But I want you to check and see what he said at the very end of the verse. He said, but so did not I. I didn't do it. I didn't take a tax. So you're asking is, why? Why did you not take a tax, Nehemiah? Because I fear the Lord. Look at verse 15. He said, besides the 40 shekels of silver, yea, even their servants bear rule over the people, but so did not I, because of the fear of God. He feared God more than anything else. And I'm telling you, if you and I are willing to say, God, I just want you, as I can't wait to hear your sermon, because I have a funny feeling that's what you were talking about. But I only want God to be pleased with me. And I can't do it if I'm stealing from someone. I can't do it if I am in any way manipulating someone's different attitudes. I can't do it. But Nehemiah is saying, you see, I could have done this, but I'm not going to do it because I fear the Lord more than anything else. Then in verses 16 through 19 is the end of chapter 5. And we see that he says, I continued in the work of this wall. He didn't stop. He made his approach to the rulers, to the kings, to all the noblemen and said, stop. You have to repay back what you've taken. As a matter of fact, I'm going to give you a praise story. And this is from someone who was supposed to be in church today. And she had a little girl that was not feeling well. But she worked for a local business. And she was told that she had to take a training class that was through the government. And so she had to pay right at $6,000 to be able to take this course so she could continue in her job. But the government class didn't get held. And so here she was. She had paid about $3,000. Class was $6,000. She went to complain and they said, we'll one day refund your money, but this is going to go against your credit because you didn't pay it. And she said, for what? I never was able to take the class. And they said, your fault. You should have taken the class. And I said, you didn't offer it. You feel like you're arguing with someone who's not having any reason. And so she came to us and we started praying. Nothing is ever lost or stolen. You're going to have recompense. God's going to take care of you. And so she tells me at the ladies' Bible study, she said, Denise, you're not going to believe what happened. She said, we were in a place that we didn't know how we were going to pay some bills. We were so short. And she said, so we were just praying and praying with you guys. And I came home from work, and my husband said, look on the table. And she said, it was the check after 2 days of complaining on my counter for $3,000. And she said, then the best part is that here they had put it against my credit. They've taken it off, and I don't have anything against us. She said, because we couldn't borrow anything. Isn't that great? And I'm telling you, that's what here we see with him in verses 16 through 19. We can't stop because people threaten us with things. Yea, I continued in the work of the wall. And so we need to understand that they have continued the work in the wall. They weren't totally done. They were finishing up the wall. God was being glorified. But I want you to notice one thing. If you look towards the very end, before they finished the wall, they were under some of the most fearsome assaults than they could ever have against the devil. The devil will never back up. He may pause, but he's not going to in any way quit. So the wall was all but complete. Only the gates remained. And Nehemiah was on the threshold of victory. So I'm telling you, sometimes you look like you're defeated, like this young lady, and her name is Sarah. She would not mind me saying her name. She thought that they didn't have enough food. They wouldn't be able to have their electricity paid and all these other things. But she was on the threshold of victory. And sometimes it looks impossible. Sometimes the enemy's going to tell you just to throw your hands up and quit. But I'm telling you, you don't need to in any way slow down or stop, because the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. He will keep you where you need to be so that you can see victory. So in chapter 6, where we're going to be beginning next week, I want you to realize we're going to see the wall is completed. And then in chapter 7, we're going to see the revival that comes because the people walked in such unity that they had Ezra come back and preach to them a revival, which motivated them to seek God even more. So I'm excited about it. I hope you got something out of it. Does anybody have a question? And how old was Nehemiah? Yes. Anything else? I'll try to see if I can figure out how many people were actually building the wall. I haven't seen that in any of my studies, so I'll see if I can find it. Now, next week, I will not be teaching Nehemiah. Miss Vicki is going to be sharing her testimony of how she died and that God brought her back to life. As a matter of fact, she told me today, she pulled me off to the side, and she said, Denise, I had to go to the doctor. My A1C has gone down. I think it was like 2 points. And she said, and the doctor did a heart test because she died of a heart attack. And she said, they said, my heart is perfect and so is my blood pressure. And so I'm just rejoicing. So she's going to be sharing next week. If you know someone who needs healing, let them come and hear. Because sometimes it's easier to hear it from someone. This is what God did for them. He can do it for me. So by all means, that's next Sunday night. And then the next Sunday night is Mother's Day. Be certain to spend time with your family. We will not have a service, but we will have 2 services on Sunday morning.